Hey, it's Carl with a K. Let's talk about Hollywood. Hi, everybody. This is Carl Gibson, and welcome to episode 38 of Let's Talk About Hollywood. Episode 38, that's where we are. This is season 2. So thank you for being here, everyone around the world. I am Carl Gibson. I'm your host, writer, narrator, guide, and friend, maybe even. And I'm glad that you're here. And this episode is all about listener and audience appreciation, which is really important to me. I wanted to check in because if you're new to this podcast, this is a serial, audio only Hollywood memoir, and it starts in 2001, and every season covers a year. So season 1 is 2001, season 2 covers 2002, and so on. And we're in 2002 right now, but today's episode is all about you, the listener, and what you mean to me. And I just want to thank you and check in and kind of take you behind the scenes of the podcast and what I've noticed and just how thankful I am for you. So first, before I do that, I want to thank all of the countries who have been listening. There's 17 of the top countries. And again, if you're not in this list, it's not that you're not a top country, because people listen to different episodes, different things resonate. So this is for the week. Okay, so thank you to the United States. Thank you to Spain. Thank you to my downloaders and listeners in Thailand. Thank you, Italy. Thank you to Canada. Thank you, Vietnam. Thank you, Brazil. Thank you, China. Thank you, Germany. Thank you, France. Thank you to the United Kingdom. Thank you, India. Thank you, Kenya. Thank you, Togo. Thank you, Finland. Thank you, South Africa. And thank you, La Réunion. Thank you all for listening. Again, every time I see those analytics and see those countries light up around the world, I'm always so honored and touched just that you found me, because you have to remember, if you don't know, this is a podcast that I don't do a lot of paid promotion for. As a matter of fact, I don't do any paid promotion. Not that I'm opposed to it. It's just that I, in starting the podcast, wanted it to be found organically. And so you never really know what's going to connect with listeners. And so I think sometimes people come for the different titles depending on what the episode is about. I think also, of course, there's the podcast art, there's my picture. And I think some people go, well, what's he talking about? And then they click. And maybe you know me, or you've seen, I've linked to it here and there on Facebook or LinkedIn or on socials, very, very, in a very limited way. So, of course, there are those of you who are finding me through the Apple iTunes store or through Spotify and different forums or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. So, again, as I always say, that you've made me a part of your routine, that you've made me a part of your evening, your day, at some point to listen and share and be a part of this community means so much to me. And so that's what this episode is about, like I said. So I'll take you a little bit behind the scenes. So I started this podcast September 24th, 2025. So last year. The podcast is only 7 months old. We're in season 2. Well, I'm in season 2. And when I started the podcast, as I've mentioned before in other episodes, I really just thought of it almost kind of like old school, like a Wendy Williams kind of thing, like a sneak peek, right? Like, okay, I'll record, four episodes so people can binge and see if they like it. And then that buys me a little time to make more episodes. And it started catching on right away. And I was honest. That was the great thing. It started growing. The audience started growing. You started listening. And it was because I was being honest. I wasn't coming to you like, I'm the Hollywood know-it-all and this is how it all works. Now, I do know how a lot of it works. And quite frankly, I don't think a lot of people want to know the truth of how it really works. Because it's not always a meritocracy, and it's full of different personalities. And I always used to joke that Hollywood is one of the few industries where being a sociopath can actually work for some people. Doesn't work for me. That's not how I'm made. But look, when I moved there, people were suing each other and would just shake hands. See you at lunch. And if you've ever been in a lawsuit or had to deal with lawyers, I mean, just even if it for anything, it could be small claims court. You're just like, that's a pain in the ass. People get lawyers because they can't talk to each other anymore. And I would just see this different kind of behavior, and people fuck each other over. Excuse my language, but this is a mature podcast, mature themes. So there are cuss words sometimes. So the podcast didn't really start with, oh, this is going to be, a tell-all and just rip the lid off of the inner workings of Hollywood. It was really a way for me to start a narrative. I can't even say reclaim a narrative, because I'd say if you work in Hollywood, or if you work in any creative capacity, or if you work in a non-creative capacity, and I think everything in Hollywood or adjacent, so wherever you are, wherever there is a film industry, theater, documentaries, news, television, writing, art, music, the whole diaspora of it, I think whatever you do in that capacity, I don't care if, like me, starting in my news career as an editorial assistant, there's always some part of yourself that you're infusing into your work, because it's not done by robots, it's not done by AI, it's done by people, and it's done by different personalities, and how they all come together is what makes the final product. And so really, I was just, when I started this podcast last September, I had already applied for, I think, 350 jobs, and I was still out of work, having just come off of 2 years at Disney Plus working on Marvel shows, Hulu originals, Disney Plus originals, Star Wars originals, and I couldn't get a job. And then I started the podcast, and then I was at 500 resumes with no job, and now I'm at 800, and this is 7 months later. Now, that doesn't mean that, I don't land interviews here or there, but as anyone who listens to this podcast who works in Hollywood, or, again, in an adjacent industry, anywhere in the world, that it's just a really tight market right now. Economics are all messed up, and it's never been easy to break into Hollywood. But I just thought, okay, I've been in this industry now for 23 years at the time that I started this podcast. And I thought, I've got some stories to tell. And the way that I did it, and the way that I got there, and what was going on behind the scenes. So that's really how it started. And I just thought, okay, I can do this podcast and not make people feel like I'm talking down to them, or that they don't know what the industry is about. It's just, I'm one story, and then maybe in sharing my story and sharing different observations, as opposed to name dropping necessarily who did what. I thought maybe it's more important about how it felt, how it feels, and how it feels to be a part of a successful entity or brand in Hollywood, and what that takes. What it takes professionally, what it takes personally, what's going on behind the scenes, how you try to balance all those different things. And so I just thought, well, I'll start with my journals. And that's really what created this podcast. I can finally speak for myself. And, and I was nervous about it. It was putting myself out there, and things that no one ever really knew that was going on, and not because they were so scandalous, but just because they were private and because I needed to keep things compartmentalized to sometimes just get through the project or get through whatever was happening at the time, including the loss of my first husband. I had to go back to work. I still had to work, as everyone does who's become a widow or widower or lost someone that they love. So that's just one example. And so I just thought, I came upon the format pretty quickly. I thought, okay, every episode will start with a modern day intro, and then we'll go into the journals, whatever that year is. And then at the end of the episode, I'll do a recap. And that kind of gets everyone back to the beginning of Space Mountain and gives some perspective. And also not just perspective on history and what was happening at the time, but also in ways that my thinking or perspective may have changed. Because again, if you're reading your journals or your diaries from 24 years ago, you're 24 years younger. You're not as informed as you are now. And maybe some of those things and some of those beliefs have still taken hold. Just good old common sense and good old intuition. But then there's some things where you have more gravitas or you have more levity and more understanding and more compassion. And so I just thought, this isn't going to be a trauma dump or anything. This will just be, hey, I'm your guide. I'll take you on a tour of what it was like in my experience. And then, that can inspire others, or just, even if not inspire, because I wouldn't be that grandiose, but I would say it would just show a connection. Like, we're really not all that different. A job is a job is a job, and if you're lucky, you're passionate about your job. And there's lots of jobs that we've all had that sucked, but we still take away something from it, because at the end of the day, and I know that's a cliche, but it does come down to audiences. So even if you're frosting cupcakes, and I don't mean even, if you're frosting cupcakes, people like it. They go, I like it because it's got extra icing, or I like it because it's not too much icing. And they come back, and you're working. And so you just start to learn what audience is like. Now, with this podcast, I don't really always know what you all like, just because I'll be honest, I don't get a lot of DMs. I don't get a lot of listener feedback. If you do want to give listener feedback, by the way, you can send that to studioexeccarl@gmail.com. So that's studio, EXECKARL @gmail.com. And you can tell me what's on your mind, or you can share, and that's fine. And I welcome it. But at the same time, I don't get a lot of feedback, but I can tell from the analytics. And so with the analytics, I can tell you right now, you never know what episodes are going to really connect. And so this is episode 38. I can tell you all, one of the top rated episodes, of course, is the first episode that I ever did, which was Welcome to the Podcast. That one was shorter, kind of lets you know what the podcast is going to be about. And if you work in podcasting, then you always know that your first episode always usually is the most popular, because that's kind of the gateway episode, right? That lets people know what they're in store for. Well, that one, of course, did well. The episode that has the most downloads and listens by far is episode 16. And that one is called How Hollywood Lost the Plot and How to Break Through Anyway. That's episode 16. It's part of season 2. And that was an 83-minute episode. It was all one hot take, recorded on November 1st, 2025, all about what the pain points were in the industry and ways to turn it around. And I was really just talking to creatives and people all over the world, not just Hollywood and New York and the major U.S. markets, but everywhere. Iowa, Mumbai, anywhere. Glasgow, anywhere. And, where art matters, and art matters everywhere. It just does. There's a global audience for it. And so I really just thought I was breaking it down, and I did. And I stand by the things that I said because I thought that it was positive, but I was also referencing myself because I don't, like to talk to people about you should be doing this and you should do this. I think people will be a lot more receptive if you start with yourself. Like reveal about yourself, which is what I try to do. I'm not trying to tell other people's stories. I'm trying to just say, hey, this is my story and this is what worked for me and this is what informed what I did. So I just think people trust you more if you're just not talking about other people and you make it more personal. Well, that episode, that's the one that's done the best. So I say all that to say you never know which episode is going to really, really break through. But that one, I can say that gets over 100 downloads in a week, like all the time. And it's recorded months ago, half a year ago. And I listened to it and I was like, oh, I've been searching, I've put out 500 resumes. And like I said, now it's 800. But it really resonated. So if you're new to the podcast and you want to hear just an 83-minute hot take with some impromptu comedy and everything else, it's like an 83-minute hot topics, except the facts are all correct. And I'm not talking about the View hot topics, by the way. I'm just saying, how people riff and aren't always accurate. I really aim for accuracy here with this podcast. So anyway, I say all that to say you never know what's going to break through, but I'm so glad that you're all here. And if you're new to the podcast, just feel free to start from the beginning, because that way it all comes together. It starts in 2001, so you're kind of seeing what's going on in the world. You're seeing what's going on in the industry. And then, of course, I'm talking about what's happening with me and my then husband, my late husband, Bebbles Stone. And that's another thing I want to talk about just with him. He never really wanted to be front and center or known when I was in my career. He was behind the scenes. He felt Hollywood should end at our front door. Of course, we could talk about it over drinks or catch up and that kind of thing about work, but then it was our time, real life time. Even though Hollywood's real life, like our actual concerns, because we weren't A-list. We were middle class and grateful for it, but we weren't living that kind of, let's go to Vegas and get the turtle soup. We didn't eat turtle soup. We didn't want turtle soup. And we wouldn't have paid $100 for it at the Bellagio. So he is someone who was so important to me. And I loved him, and he was my husband. And that was in title only, because gay marriage was not legal then, but we lived it. We lived it literally till death do you part. And we knew we were kind of renegades on the one hand, just because no one would have put us together. I was 240 pounds. He was 270 pounds. Like we used to call each other like almost half a ton of trouble, but that was just amongst ourselves joking. But I mean, we knew that, everyone doesn't have that. Everyone doesn't have that ability. Everyone doesn't have that freedom to have a same-sex relationship. And there were consequences that we both had dealt with, especially him, meaning his mother put him out of her house when he told her that he was gay. And they were estranged for 6 years, and that's a long time to not talk to a parent. And they did reconcile, thank God, until she passed away. But he had been through it. And so we really didn't make that our politics. We were just like, we're living it. If you see us, then you know about us. The Hollywood Reporter, some people knew about us, some people didn't, but that really wasn't for any shame on my part or his. It was just, that's our business. You're working in a newsroom full of reporters. We weren't the story. I was an editorial assistant. So I know I wasn't the story. And I know that once you start getting into town and you start working these award circuits and you start working these premieres and the nightlife events, then of course you do become, someone that's a little more recognizable within the town. But it just wasn't up for discussion. I just thought, I'm going to live it. I'm not going to defend it. I'm going to honor my relationship. And, again, I know that we were lucky. We're lucky. We had the freedom to do so. And there are threats to that kind of freedom all the time. We were just two adult grown men who loved each other. And it was like, well, that's better than beating the shit out of each other or not having love or faith or grace and just being, heathens. Half a ton of heathen, so anyway, we again, with this podcast, I could tell, I can be honest with you listeners, I could tell there was an initial drop off when I started bringing Bebbles into the podcast, as far as in the diaries or the journals. I will go so far without naming which side, but I can tell you that in my own family, there were people that just stopped listening. They were just, for whatever reason. And I'm sure that there were regular audience members that just stopped listening. Like, even though that's not, the key narrative of these episodes, I don't want to hear it. And I personally, if that's the way you feel, then of course, don't listen. There's millions of podcasts out there and you can listen. But what ended up happening was, I just kept recording them because he's important and he's someone who was real and he's someone who was a part of my life. And the contrast of the life that we were living, and as blunt and direct as we were with each other, and sometimes arguing and very blue collar, really at our basis, contrasted with this kind of A-list, perfect mirage in Hollywood. It really resonated with you listeners. And so I'd say after that initial drop off, it spiked. And Bebbles is now a beloved character and person in these podcasts. And in season 1, there's an episode I did called In Memoriam. Thank you, Bebbles Stone. And I'll give you the episode number of that in case you're following. That was episode 14. And that was the episode where I told you, the audience, that he passed away in 2005. I had found a sweet romantic letter that he had written me, and I hadn't seen it or read it in years. It was misfiled in a folder. And as you know, anyone who's, lost someone dear to them, which is all of us, you put things away, you pack things up, or you kind of try to, organize things in the midst of your grief. And then 5 years later, something falls behind the refrigerator and there's a note that they had pinned to the refrigerator, or the cat knocks something under the cat or the dog knocks something under the couch. And then you reach under there and, there's a personal effect or something that came off of their necklace, or, there's just always these little clues that come up. And that's when I was like, well, I have to honor him in this podcast. And I also have to let the audience know that he passed away, which a lot of you didn't know at the time. And so I cried through that episode. I tried to be humorous through some of the tears, and I just didn't edit it out. And I didn't worry about it being messy. I knew that I wasn't just dumping this in your laps. I just thought, okay, you all trust me. I'm going to get you through this responsibly, and also let you know that I'm okay and that you will be okay too. So a lot of this podcast is about shared humanity. And so, I never know which episodes are going to do the best or quote unquote go viral, like based on my metrics. And I don't try to make them that way. I just try to really be honest. And if you've listened to this podcast, then a lot of it is journal based. Then sometimes there's just contemporary things that are happening in Hollywood or that are topics in the industry in the moment. And the podcast is called Let's Talk About Hollywood. So we do. So I just want to let you know, I really appreciate all of the diversity of the different professions and countries of all of you who are part of this Let's Talk About Hollywood community. And this podcast is always free, so it's not like there's a Patreon tier, and there's not like it's a bonus episode subscriber tier. Not that, again, I'm knocking other podcasters' methods and the way that they do it, because that's smart. That works for them. I'm just saying, you can trust, if you're here, we're all in this together. You can access the same episodes that everyone else can for free. And those who can donate are able to. And I don't have an ad, I don't have ad sponsors. I'm not doing influencer swaps. If you want to donate to the podcast, it's super simple. You can just go to www.letstalkabouthollywood.com/support. Or you can go to my website, which is letstalkabouthollywood.com. And there's a donation box there. And there's also links in the show notes. So wherever you got this podcast, it's in the show notes. And you can just click the link. I use DonorBox, which is recognized in 86 countries, deals with 96 currencies. So it's very safe. And so if you feel like donating $5, you can. And I appreciate it. And I will thank you on air. And if you don't want to be thanked, just let me know you don't want to be thanked. Or, and I won't. But I always thank people who have donated to the podcast. And so many of, 90% of podcasts stop after episode 3. And less than 1% of indie podcasts like this is an indie podcast, less than 1% reach 20 plus countries. And I have. And that's because of you, because we're all here together. And this memoir is not just, about the celebrity stuff. It's about work and editorial work, international work, characters, takeaways, and that kind of thing. So, before I wrap this up, I just wanted to make this episode, just a way to thank you, a way for you to see how this came together, what kind of goes into it behind the scenes. I'm really just trying to be honest and authentic. And I think that, again, it's shared humanity, things that we have in common. And the things that I talk about that might not be comfortable, as far as racism or, it's not as politics. It's just, it's reality, and it's things that people deal with. And I do believe that we all have so many things in common, and art and entertainment are one of them. It's a great equalizer, and for 24 years so far in my career, and I'm nowhere near done, I made other companies sound good. I made them look good, along with, sometimes tens of other people, and sometimes thousands of other people, and sometimes tens of thousands of other people. But this is the first time that I really get to just sound like me, and you, the listener, and this community are why it works. Because communion in community isn't me talking at you. It's us remembering together. And that's what I'm doing here. And thank you for proving that there's a community and telling the truth and being honest. And season 2 continues, and I'll be here because you are. And I cannot thank you enough. There'll be more episodes like this to thank you, but thank you for being here, and have a great rest of the week. And as always, don't forget, love is real, and I wish you all great things. See you next time.